Warning. This video contains mature content. Viewers should be minimum 18 years olds. Or use internet for like 2 weeks. All characters in this game are minimum 18 years old. Welcome you to the essay of breeding season history. Present day of games 18 plus and maybe future. We start with history, just where we left off in part 1. I will try shed some light why breeding season failed. And what were the consequences of this. So thanks to old Polish sources. If you believe what has been published, and we have to do because the links to these sources work like the Venezuelan government. The creators earned about $42,000 a month. In 2016, such earnings for a probably small studio, where employees most likely worked from home and did not rent penthouses on Manhattan. I would say that these are very good earnings that guarantee product development and its success. And here we go back to the creators. I don't want to delve into who was right or who was the victim. But whenever two people start fighting each other, it's rather too late for neutral observers to draw conclusions. Or you've been there from the beginning and knew all the details. Or you might as well choose who to support by tossing a coin. And I don't want to do that. As both had copyrights to the title, neither could continue the work without the consent of the other. What resulted from this split? One of the developers decided to start producing his own game.
I'm gonna go build my own
breeding simulator
with blackjack and hookers. In fact, forget the
breeding.
The second one said,
"Screw you guys, I'm going home."
And that's all I heard about him. So let's move to the present. In a moment it will be the beginning of July, which is exactly 5 years after the collapse of the Colossus. Has anyone managed to cross this mythical finish line and end the game in the genre of Monster Girl Management Simulator? Did any of the non-Japanese independent developers manage to finish the Monster Girl Management Simulator genre with breeding elements? Well, we'll take a quick look at the participants. Cloud Meadow game from one of the creators is still being developed in many directions. The malicious will even say too many. We have a response from 3D fans in the form of breeders of the Nephilim with proven mechanics from the breeding season. Optimization may turn out Achilles' heel. And as a sole successor of Breeding Farm, which most faithfully tries to recreate the original. Unfortunately, for the time being, the developers have stopped working on the game to focus entirely on another production. It is almost July 2021, and this may change. Maybe I missed some games, maybe some other games are coming up in the future. But this 3 in my opinion is the closest to what breeding season was. I leave some production for later review. Because maybe they have some common elements. In my opinion it is worth making a separate material about them. Perhaps the more creative and entrepreneurial part of you started making plans. And I am not surprised. Even though the race started many years ago, the first place is still up for grabs. And all the glory plus money along with it. Even if the current competition has made great progress, the planned release dates, if even planned, they are still counted in years from today. In short, the race is still going on and I will be happy to see another promising competitor. Breeding season is also the reason why I will never recommend or review a game in development. This pseudo-review and essay is more of an attempt to put this game in a museum to show it to future interested generations to learn from it like the rest who have already done so. An arranged so-called funeral that the game deserved. And since I have encouraged some to work, it will not be fair if I do not mention the minuses. Very big minuses. The production of games in small-person teams, especially in one-person teams, is a real marathon for the soul and mind. It takes a really titanic will to win this duel, and you have to win it every day. Please, let me explain. Imagine that your dream has come true. You have a lot of money every month from Patreon and the seed of the game in an early version. And now realize it. That to complete this project you would have to work on average about 9 hours a day, including Saturdays and Sundays for 2 to 3 years. Suppose you work alone and no one checks how often or how hard you work. At work that you might hate after a year. The code in the game probably sucks because you started as an amateur and you'd rather start it all over again or throw the project to hell. But here comes the problem. The money you earn is too much to let it go, and money is always a scarce commodity. So if you do the minimum required to keep the people in the Patreon somewhat happy, you will also keep trying to pull it off for as long as possible, with a minimum amount of work. I hope you will really love the project you start with all your heart at the beginning. Because working in a project that requires creativity and self-discipline, when you hate it, well, I don't wish that to anyone. The reverse of this is the normal work model, which is simply based on ordinary game development studios. When you have to get up every morning and go to the office to work with 6 other guys who also have to do this to get paid. Productivity is a lot different when you don't do anything all week because you've discovered the new show and the money keeps flowing in. Of course they have more people in the studio, of course their games aren't as great as yours will be. But they are already sent 4 good games, each one better than another. And you are still working on the perfect game and the end is nowhere to be found. And I don't want to sound like an asshole here, because small and independent creators from the West have no other way to start this business. The problem is that this industry needs a partial and slow transition to the Japanese model. I guess after so many years of financial stability it is time for the top players to start thinking about getting into it seriously. Rent an office close to your place of residence, hire a few boys or girls. And still having a safety net in the form of a Patreon, start releasing more titles. And not just rely on a great holy grail to be a perfect game, in about 10 years in beta. They don't expect a good game anymore, they expect a masterpiece. Of course, that's easier said than done. Learning not only better coding but better graphics design is not enough. You have to learn how to manage a team, even if it is small. And you also have to create it from scratch. Because I doubt that people with experience in this industry want to enter through your doors and windows. To that branch, which is considered a laughingstock to the rest of the industry. Although once it was the same with ordinary computer games. And now look all the stars of this world how much they try to suck phallic objects of nerds. Who 20 to 30 years ago sat in the basement and played chess. Because it turned out that their great media do not earn so well after all. In this part of the industry, there is also a sea of possibilities, but for the time being they all sit in the same river. Because there are enough fish in it for the time being they don't have to try to produce larger ships cause catching fish at sea will be too risky and difficult. Some of you probably more knowledgeable about games of all kinds may provide the example of game Subverse to challenge my arguments. And now let's move on to this topic. Maybe some of you don't know what Subverse is all about. So it is a game created exactly in the way I propose. That is a small studio but huge for the market conditions in which we are located, namely 18+ game market. Not counting Japan, of course, to which we will go later. And some of you say it destroys my arguments. So let's add one more thing. Studio FAO is and was known for producing 3D animations in the 18+ age category, very good in my humble opinion. I will repeat once again, the most famous production in the media in the West and I think one of the biggest ones I deal with, is a studio that grew out on animations. Maybe I'll give you another example so you can understand. Imagine a croquet team that changes the sport, wins the World Cup, the Champions League and pissed on the Vince Lombardi trophy after winning it for laughs. This gap in the 18+ game industry was so big that even the animation industry saw and said, Jesus, what a idiots. They spit people in the face and they had to pretend it was rain.
Are you winning, son?
Of course, Subverse has yet to win the toughest battle. To create a good game is still in front of them. But you have to give back to them that with marketing alone, they did more for the awareness of players in the West for 18+ games, than the rest of the industry. If Studio FAO gets it right and makes a good game, just make it good. It may turn out that many will follow in their footsteps from other game studios. Where instead of spending a time of developing indie game on Steam and counting on a miracle that someone will notice it, it might be better to follow Studio FAO and release it on a market where there is no decent competition. And the number of fish on our river will stop to increase, and unfortunately the number of small ships will continue as always. Or maybe Subverse will end in a big failure, as the final game. And everyone on the river nods with smirks, looking on that amateurs trying to challenge the sea. Or maybe the game will come out good and nothing will change. If someone knows something for sure, it's not me. I'm just afraid of this little Wild West that is the 18+ gaming market. Someday the larger publishers will notice this place and we only can ask what they will do. The very optimistic version is one in which a few smaller teams will simply show up, of course under a false flag to get this piece of cake. And looking at this year E3, I prefer this place to be taken by inexperienced developers who really like these games, rather than soulless studios to make games from the leftovers of the larger brands. There is also a pessimistic version, when gentlemen investors will say that we bring disgust to their gaming market. After all, they do real art here, and we with game like. There you can insert any game 18+ and describe a few of its elements. Would have enough for 3 decent crusades in media. Altogether, playing 18+ game during the crusades is an interesting idea. But when the big studios play a card,
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
and politicians will join, because of course they will. It may turn out that starting on a Patreon or Kickstarter will not be so easy. An example would be the Patreon who, without going into details, quickly forced patches slightly changing the story in lots of games. And the next time, it may not be enough to change a few texts and release a separate patch to restore the older version of the game. And I doubt that this video will expose this market to a larger publisher. They are over there too busy with sexual harassment and going to strip clubs to bother with some 18+ games. That's below their dignity. Of course, they will never eradicate it completely, not even close. But then you can forget about something bigger in this industry for many years as long as moderately effective laws will be in effect. But if at least a few small to medium-sized companies were created that pay taxes, they would have a greater voice than 1,000 entities scattered around the world. Perhaps then the cost of exterminating them would be too great. Especially in the PR department, when one studio close the other because they are making games. Maybe. And Japan? Well, Japan is a bit of an example of what it might look like. Both small and medium studios, plus a new one starting their adventures in this business with the help of Patreon. And competition from Western markets would only improve the situation. This would mean more consumers in Western markets and more chances that people would play a game having localization in their favorite store. Not a translation done by Google Translator, with a game that won't run unless Windows is set to Japanese. Not to mention Apple users, that this world is now as alien and hostile to them as the surface on Venus to jellyfish. As for Japanese companies, the abolition of some regulations would also help. You would not have to wonder what to cut for the Steam version and whether Valve politics will change after 2 months. And for those who do not see the need for change. Don't you really believe that between Canada and Argentina there is no good developer and graphic designer for 18+ games? That no one between the hot rock of Gibraltar and the cold Arkhangels has a single idea for a new interesting game? That there is no one in all of Australia who would not put their gaming laws in politicians, where the sun doesn't go. But what do I know? Maybe take it all as the mumbling of someone who has been sober for too long. In conclusion, I am sorry that the material was not only about breeding season. It was supposed to be only 2 sentences at the end of the review to briefly explain the situation. But you had to give context to this, then that. And you're ending the script with 2,000 words that you didn't plan on. And thank you for making it to the end. Well, the next review will also take a long time. Not by script or editing, it will just take a while to complete the game. Therefore, there may be some very short review in the meantime as breath of fresh air on the channel. Big Mike. See you next time.